Why do we come into this life?
We are not just here to create heaven on earth, but we are literally parts of heaven here on earth. A lot of people are in the karma or dharma stage. We could either define ourselves by the narratives or define the narrative. That to me was a big game changer when I had my near death experience.
This is a heavy question. If you're uncomfortable with it, just let me know
I'm a
now.
New Yorker. We could take a shot to the chin.
Jake, welcome to the channel. Thank you so much for being willing to spend this time with me. Would you like to start by just sharing your near death experience in whatever way you feel led?
Yeah. Thank you first and foremost for having me as your honored guest. Very proud and inspired of all the work that you do. Keep at it. But yeah, I had my near death experience at the age of 3 years old in September of 1993. I contracted pertussis, otherwise known as whooping cough, at the time. And I went to a park with family, friends, and climbed up the ladder to the slide and began to suffocate at the top of the ladder. Wasn't able to breathe, was completely suffocated. And due to the deprivation of oxygen, every part of my body ceased to function, wasn't working. And much like a car, if your car is not working, if you try to rev up your engine, it's kind of pointless to stay in the car. So I got out of my car and out of my body, so to speak, and looked at it just to kind of see what was going on and lifted up and looked at the engine. And, I just knew that there was just this part of me that wasn't produced by the body or the brain, but rather was just filtered through it. And so in the disembodied state, I just had all this awareness of so much more of my neurophysiological states and functionality that I don't think most doctors were privy to, never mind an innocent 3-year-old, just kind of due to this lifetime. But, and then slowly I just, like a power breaker in a home, due to the deprivation of oxygen, my body wasn't functioning. And it was just kind of like you take each switch off and just turn it off. That's what happened was occurring to my body. And the last part that I was able to feel and sense was my brain. And I could feel and have an understanding of my brain so much more than before. And the awareness was so much deeper than I could ever express. And slowly but surely, due to the deprivation of oxygen, I literally felt my brain just crack in half or snap in half as if you're plugged into this wall of the body and you just yank this cord from the body and you're no longer in this body. And so before this, when I was suffocated, I was just in this period of what felt like eternal suffering where I wasn't in my body. I wasn't crossed over. It just felt like an eternal period of suffering and suffocation. And once literally my brain snapped in half, that's when I really started, having a lot of the classical experiences of near-death experiencers, the tunnel phenomenon and going to light, experiencing vibrational frequencies. And I was able to see a part of myself that was soaring upwards and upwards with infinite pace and infinite torque and velocity, and just almost as if I felt like I was on the most powerful roller coaster at a theme park. And there was just no end to how high I was soaring. I was aware of my body, and to the right side of my brain, I became aware of just this incredibly climactical octave and this divine palace that was right to the right side of my brain. And the best way I could describe that was a high expression of the center point of creation, which I could best describe in the vernacular as God to me. But the word at the time was so limited, and we'll get to words in a little bit too. But I was just going off in this endless climax. And I think in the body, we're not used to that. We're used to being bioneurochemical and limited with how good we could feel or needing to do something to feel something. But this, I was just in this endless place of endless euphoria. And, moments later, I was able to hear sounds and pitches and frequencies and colors of this palace behind me that were of no comparison and contraction. The best word I could describe it was almost kind of like a golden color, but that word is beyond limiting. And a couple moments later, I just became aware of this field and this color of kind of like a bronze color that was in front of me. And it was just like this endless sky of bronze that I was connecting to. And I had what I could best describe it as an awareness of a ray of God, or just the highest ray of God almost that you could connect to. And this was a Christ consciousness that I connected to. And in this field of awareness, in this energy field, I became incredibly comforted. I still had attachment to my 3-year-old body. My awareness was of an eternal soul. And I was just worried about believing my parents or worried about what I would be when I grow older and all those questions still connected to that life as a 3-year-old. But I was comforted in this all was well, all will be well, all was always well, eternal awareness. And there was nothing to worry about. There was nothing to do, nothing to look in the past. I was just in this moment of eternal trust and knowingness of this pure love, pure unconditional love that I was and forever connected to. And just it was just the most euphoric sensation in comparison with the utmost pain and suffering of suffocation that I experienced. And then moments later, I became aware of my two spiritual guides who were accompanying me to the right and left side of me. There was a male and female guide. It's one part of my near death experience that I don't remember as clearly was their exact names. And, in meditation, I do get them, but at the time, it was very clear as crystal their exact names, who they were, and what they looked like. And I just felt so ashamed and embarrassed that I forgot that they were there with me this entire time. And it was the closest connection that I had to my inner being that I could possibly express. It was just a close extension of who I was. And it was so enmeshed with my inner being. But the guides literally were there, and it just was the most comforting feeling to just know that there's just so much that I forgot on about that was inside of me, around me, that was accompanying me on this journey and this human experience. Slowly but surely, they allowed my body and forced my body down the slide. And I saw the people that I was with at the park that day, and they were looking at my meat suit on my body and calling me. And my body was irresponsive, but I was aware of my form, which was to the side of my meat suit of my body. And I was trying to communicate with them. And I just became very frustrated that I was trying to talk to them, but they couldn't see or hear me. They were looking at a body, which I knew was not ever me. It was just a vehicle or a tool for the instrument of my soul. And a couple moments later, I became aware of their own energy fields, their own auric electromagnetic fields around them, and their own angels around them. And I just became privy of so much awareness about their soul and their minds and their hearts that I wasn't aware of from before. And it just showed me that all is divine, all is spiritual. Not everyone remembers and connects to that, but you take an orange, you squeeze an orange out, you're left with orange juice. You squeeze us out, all you're left with is pure, eternal, unconditional, infinite, divine love. And I saw that in them, and it just was fascinating looking back. But a couple moments later, I became aware of endless ray of angels that were just floating right in front of me. And these are very young, youthful in presentation angels. And whereas the spirit guides or my primary guides had a lot of more human characteristics and they were more micro focused on me. These angels that I saw were very much focused on the planet and they weren't as centered on myself. They were just there on a macro basis. They had no almost uniformal identity. It just was kind of like a minions for the angelic team of God, so to speak. But when I looked at them, I almost just had to pinch myself because they were so real right in front of me. It was just this thin veil separating the other realms. It's like you take a dial and just turn it up a slight smidget above this reality, and heaven is really right here. The other side is right overlaying this. And looking at them, I became aware of the octaves and the healing energy coming out of them. And just, it was so profound, much like the light of God that I was seeing, that I just almost had to shield myself. So beautiful, but it's literally right in front of me. And I could look at it with my own mind's eye. And slowly but surely became greeted by my own, spirit family, which were just different loved ones that I've carnated with throughout different lifetimes. And I just, we could get into soul family a little bit and, a little explanation about it, but I just became aware of almost in a way being put on the spot with my soul family coming through in the distance and my spirit guides and my angels as to what will I do in the light realm on the other side. Will I stay with them or would I continue and live out my life as I was doing? And I just posed a question was if I do continue this life, what is my dharma? What is my purpose? What am I here for? What does that look like? And slowly but surely, I just had flashing imagery of different lifetimes that I lived. And I was literally just spanning the globe in different cultures and civilizations, just very, very, very fast and very quick, just in and out of different lifetimes. And one lifetime that really, there was a couple that I chronicled life after breath, but the closest lifetime to this lifetime was a lifetime in which I took my own life. I was a teacher of many students. My back was against the wall. I lost hope and faith. And I was similarly to what I had in the near death experience. I was deprived of the oxygen of life and there was nothing to hold on to. And I took my own life, which has been evidentially read by different intuitives and mediums who, have read this prior to me coming out with Life After Breath or any of my public work, which I talk about in Life After Breath. It's evidence of information about this lifetime that I lived. But I became quite emotional when I was able to see my own students of that lifetime and their faces just came to me. And I understood that when I did that, that I was back to a beautiful realm of God and I was judged. But I just knew that there was a connection between that lifetime when I committed suicide and this allegory, the near death experience and the light at the end of the tunnel and the entrustment of what's inside of me is infinitely greater than any finite challenge in front of me. And moments later, I was able to see myself speaking in front of numerous people and, really echoing this message. And so I really thought to myself, as beautiful as the other side is, just as euphoric as it is, and as beyond words as it is, this unique window to plug in the hereafter into the here now and to have this awareness and come back was something that I could not turn down. That was more beautiful than heaven. And I was a kid who turned down heaven. And slowly but surely, the guides in my family started to disappear. And I just kind of asked, how do I know that this will happen? I just began doubting myself because it all looks so much better when you're over there than when you're over here. It looks a lot easier. And I was just left with a pure, clear thought, which was the power of intention, the power of thought, and trusting the path and trusting the higher awareness much greater than our own and our power of our own thoughts as a gateway to really allow us to go through in the life that we were born and destined to live out. And, with that, I woke up on a hospital bed and I became aware of my mother who was quite distraught with my condition. And the feeling of suffocation lasted, nearly 2 decades. And why I say that was I kept this very close to my heart, which is common for a lot of near death experiencers, particularly with the trauma that it occurs. But it just felt like such a sacred experience that I didn't even bother with telling anyone. I kept it so close to my heart. And nearly 2 decades later, I really held this on. And it wasn't until I read a book by the author by the name of Betty Eadie called Embraced by the Light, which allowed me to understand a universality behind this experience. I just thought I was like Harry Potter, this chosen one, and I had this experience that no one else had. And reading Betty's book was a double-edged sword because, in one hand, it gave me universality, but on the other hand, it's like, okay, I'm not that special. Other people have had this. So, but it just allowed me that, oh my God, this has an actual term to it. And I'm just so thankful to Dr. Raymond Moody for coining that. But, I'm sure there's a lot to get into. So, yeah, that's a bit of the short. And I know in my book, Life After Breath, I talk a bit more specifically about some of the experiences on the other side.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Jake. What an incredible experience, and to have it at such a young age as well. I have so many questions
Yeah.
for you, but I guess I could start with you had this experience when you were 3. I can't remember if you said that to me just now or if it was in a previous interview that I was listening to that you you experienced this not as a 3-year-old human, but from an expanded state of consciousness. Why do you think that is, or how does that work?
Well, I think in a way, we all could say I'm a spiritual being in a
Mhm.
human body, in a
Right.
physical body. But we're not able to apply that to chronological age. We associate development of chronology with our own soul, and the two are not always congruent with each other. The expression of the body with the soul in it. And so I'll say there are very old people who are soulless, who aren't as connected, and they're very young people who are quite wise. And, young children to me are the most heightenedly aware because they're just coming from the other side. They're reincarnating, they're reborn. And so they're very connected to their inner being. But I would say there's an outer representation of who we are and a development of our personality in this lifetime. And that's just, a chapter. Before that, there's an entire encyclopedia of our own inner being and many different lifetimes. And so chronological physical age doesn't always is not congruent with our soul age.
Right.
And some people they're able to really have a lot of parallels and ways to express that, but it's kind of like almost like a guitar player. They play the guitar many times, but they're just getting used to a new guitar and they're just familiarizing themselves with that. And I think that's the way the soul and the body work. It takes time for the soul and the body to work together and for the body to have an outer representation and communication of our soul and development. But I think the majority of our life is on an inner level. And just because it's not being seen doesn't mean it's not real. And I think that's the same thing with spirituality. Just because we don't see it doesn't mean something's not happening. It's kind of like just on a physical basis. Like I always say, I love that analogy where I'll ask you, are you on a chair right now? You could say, yes, I'm in a chair. I say, well, are you really on a chair? You're in a chair, which is in a room, which is in a state, which is in a country, which is in a world, which is spreading around the planet in a galaxy. So on a physical basis, we are not what we really think we are. And and if that's the case, just on a pure physical basis, imagine what it's like from unseen force fields of our true nature. We are just so much more than what we think, what we can imagine. And I guess from losing myself, I was able to really regain who I truly was, which is
Mhm.
infinite spiritual being, ageless and timeless in this finite body. And I wasn't this personality of 3-year-old Jake. That was just an expression and an experience of my soul.
In a previous interview that you did, I heard you say that when you went down the tunnel, that it was an inner journey. So you're traveling within yourself. And I don't know if this is a question so much as me just sharing my thoughts, and I'm curious what you think about it. But it reminds me of something I heard Melon Thomas Benedict say in his experience.
Mhm.
He originally could not see the light, and then an angel appeared to him and told him to find the light within his own heart.
Mhm.
And once he did that, he had this connection to the light that everybody sees in the near death experience. So I'm wondering if maybe it's more like dimensional travel. Obviously, it probably is more dimensional travel than traveling to another place. What do you think that journey is, or even what is that light? What is the light that we're seeing and connecting to?
Yeah, it's just so foreign to all of us because in our world, we're taught that in order to be something, we need to do something outside of ourselves. And living in this world, we search for so much things outside of us that we forget that, we have so much in our own backyard and so much beauty. And I
Mhm.
really think the more that we dig in within ourselves and really connect, we recognize we're just connected on such a deep inner level to this eternal universe right within our own backyard. And sometimes we forget that. And I do believe we're in an ocean in one drop, in a way, and we are just so much more than we could ever imagine. But it's the journey within, it's that backyard, and it's our own inner connection to the side, and it's something that we're forever connected to a deep inner level. It's not something far out outside of ourselves. But to point to the other side would not be fair to eternity or infinite. If I were to just say, there it is, that would be a finite infinite. And so the other side is everywhere. It's all inside of us, all around us. But it
Mm.
starts with really going inwards to that place. And it's personal, it's micro, it's macro, it's the all, but it's a journey within. And I think all expansive journeys start that way, really going within. I mean, if you look at Buddha, for instance, he was living a life in which it was predicted that he either had two paths of him, outer success or inner success, in which he really enlightened people and he go into the light, right? That's where that comes
Yeah.
from. And living a life as Siddhartha, he was quite unsatisfied with the wife and I think a kid, and he just it wasn't enough that outer life, and he really sought out and left that life behind, and he connected to a beautiful place within, and he found that true peace. He found nirvana, all that stuff. And I think really it's from finding the world that we're holding on to that's so fleeting and temporary, from losing that, right? We were able to find something else. And that's what happened with my body, with my ego, with my identity. From able to lose a temporary identity as 3-year-old Jake in this body, I was able to open up to myself that I was just so much more than this body, than this lifetime, than this dimension. And so I think that's all the paths of all expansive journeys, losing what you're holding on to as a part of your identity, to allowing yourself to open up to expanded awareness and looking at the world through bright eyes of the child, so to speak, with infinite curiosity, expansiveness, and just understanding that there's no end to who we are, that we're limitless.
I found it very interesting that you mentioned when you were being shown what your life would become if you came back, that it was more beautiful to you than heaven. And a lot of people say, I would never come back here because it's just so hard. I never would have planned this and I'm never coming back. So
For
I'm
sure.
curious what your opinion is on why do we come into this life and why do we choose it and why is it so beautiful to us?
I think it's all, about perception. And, I think if you have a broader based perspective and you're looking at the world through the God's lens, through the God lens, or the higher lens, you're able to see things through the face value. And so, you can have an event, but with that event, there's a stimuli and response. And so I think if you're living from the outside in, it's very hard to live your life. Whatever the wave comes, that's where the leaf goes. But if you're able to generate your own current and have a solid foundation as Christ did with the strongest winds, you realize you really have so much more power and freedom. It's a lot of it is learning unconditional love with yourself and with life itself. It's not of a convenience or a checklist when everything is added up. I think this lifetime there's so much turmoil and suffering, and we could engage with that so differently. We could say there's turmoil, there's suffering, I'm helpless, or you could say I have actual power in my own life to find meaning, to find a purpose, to find something different. And so I think right now a lot of people are in the karma or dharma stage where we could either define ourselves by the narratives or define the narrative. And that's to me what dharma is about, finding meaning, finding purpose behind what we're going through. And I think if we could do that, we're really evolving ourselves to not be defined by experiences, but to define experiences in a very heightened way. And that keeps me up at night, just learning different ways to see it. And I also think though, it's having a knowing that despite whatever we're going through, and certainly I experienced that in my near-death experience and looking at darkness and looking at suffocation right in the eyes, the temporary construct of that and that it came back to the nothingness of what it was. And so it's oftentimes from looking at darkness that we can remember who we truly are and the light that we're forever connected to. And I've yet to find anyone through an impact without going through that dark night of the soul, that period of turbulence, which is there, I think to really shake us up and to allow us an opportunity to really ascend, as well as to have more understanding, passion, and empathy with those who might be a couple of exits off the road that we just traveled. And I think this lifetime is very much a preparatory period to be a spiritual guide, but we don't have to wait until we're angelic form to do that. We could practice those same tenets here. And I think that's a beautiful part that we don't have to wait to heaven to create it. We are not just here to create heaven on earth, but we are literally parts of heaven here on earth. And we have to remember that.
That's beautiful. You mentioned Christ a moment ago, and I do remember you saying that you have an Orthodox Jewish background,
Right.
correct? You mentioned experiencing the energy of Christ, and
Mhm.
I'm curious if there's any difference between what you were taught about Christ and what you experienced of Christ.
Yeah. What I would say is this. I mean, first and foremost, people forget that Jesus was probably more Jewish than I was in his lifetime. He lived in Israel and he was like a socialistic, conservative, reform rabbi kind of thing. So, his life, but obviously within the faith, it wasn't something that, was endorsed or something I was taught. So it's interesting about the near death experiencers where they have something totally incongruent many times of what they were taught. And so what I would say is this we have forms that we come through without lifetimes. But beyond that, is a consciousness. Beyond that is an energy. And I call it the ray of the divine that we are. And we take on different bodies, different forms. Beyond that is an unlimited energy. And I think really within lifetimes, it's remembering who we truly are and embodying that same energy. And so I think obviously there's a study and practice of that, but to me, God and all of spirituality is very much of an inner experience. And so that's really how I connect to God into Christ consciousness. It's very much personalized and very much on an inner basis. And so, at least for me, that's just what I do. I mean, other people, might be different in a way, but I would say all these things are just beyond this earth in so many ways, and there's just these energies that are just so like difficult to just pinpoint or bog down with words. It's more of like a feeling. It's more of a knowing. It's more of an inner connection that's very much personal to
Yeah.
each individual. And I think God is very much personal because I think we are a part of that. And so it's very much of a personal dynamic and interplay that we have in our own development with the core of who we are, if that makes sense.
What are some of the lessons for these current times that you can share with us about the other side?
I think we have to have a whole other show with that because there's so much suffering out there and there's so much pain and so much loss and grief. To just people forgetting who they are. I think the good part about this last year or two was it had the potential to expedite the impermanence of the body. And that to me was a big game changer when I had my near death experience. Knowing the fragility of the body, knowing the fragility of this life as we know it, with just any second that could be taken. And I think in the last couple of years, that's been really broadcasted to many. And that really isn't anything new. This body is finite in nature, but sometimes we just cruise and forget that and play the conveyor belt in this game. And so we can engage with that with either ways. We could have fear with that, or we could allow that to really allow a lot more mindfulness, a lot more purpose, and a lot more ways to beat our own drum and to really live out who we truly are and what's inside of us. And I think the most important part is for people to be empowered during this time. Our lives have been quite disempowered from almost day one. When we think about it, we
Mm.
were physically dependent on parents, and that led to ideological dependency with adults. And many times we just put away our own truths in others' hands. And there's a synonymous confusion with the old age of our soul, with with the youth of our development in our body. And so I think really it's letting that go and recognize that the love inside of us, the love around us, and the intelligence inside of us, intelligence around us is so infinitely expansive, and it could really guide us through these challenges so that we don't directly go at it, but we could go through it very skillfully and just kind of like be like water, like Bruce Lee would talk about, just
Mm.
have an inner flow. And so I think if we're able to live from the inside out and be on this earth, but not of this earth, we could really have a proper foundation to really transform this time, which trans just meaning changing shape. Trans is to change and form is form. I think we have the ability to transform this planet from coming from a solid foundation. I think part of the issue is the weak foundation, and people are getting caught up in living outside in versus inside out, and they're not properly anchored in their own inner being.
Yeah, then that's the journey, isn't it? To become
Yeah.
anchored within.
Yeah. And I think really the world is so much of a reflection of what we connect to. And the more of this stuff that we connect to on a deep inner level, the more that we connect to with others. And I think also the finite of the body is helpful to understand the finite of this whole apparatus that we're on, where there's a lot of attachment, obviously. And I'm not just endorsing minimalism or going at materialism. I think that has its time and place for different levels. But it's also important to look at it and to remember its nature, that behind a hearse, you cannot take a U-Haul. I mean, you can if you wanna get back at your family members, but in general, you can't, so that this is very temporary, and so where do we wanna put our energies? Do we wanna put it towards egocentric, self-serving ways, or do we wanna leave this planet better than behind when we left it and to have a ripple effect? And that's really behind the work that I do each and every day. It's just finding different ways to create that ripple effect. And that's all of, to me, the most closest to the collateral that we could have within our lifetimes is, how we're able to really speak out beauty and what octave do we have in this universe, which means unity is one and verse means song. What was our octave? What was our song? What was our message to the world in this lifetime?
So you are a hypnotherapist, correct? And you specialize in past life regression. And I'm
Yes.
curious how your near death experience influenced you to go down that path and what do you do with that?
Yeah. After having my near death experience, and I talk a little bit about this in Life After Breath, trauma allowed me, I do believe, to hold on to it and have such clear recollection of it. But the other side of it was it made for a very complicated childhood where this apparatus that I was on, I was just taken off of it and I was just asked to like play the game and and it's just almost kind of like I was remembering that this was just an act. I was just putting on a suit on this play of life and I wasn't attached to it as much. And so, and obviously the suffocating parts of my brain allowed my brain to have a lot more of a clearer light coming through it. And so I was able to go in between two worlds very easily from the filter of my own life or what we call the brain was very much open. And so from that, I had a lot of recollection of between lives, past lives, and was able to cross over very, very easily. And a lot of it was pretty overwhelming for a young kid to just be in the middle of nowhere and have all these downloads, happen to me. But I understood that hypnosis works very similar to the near death experience without the traumatic experience of suffocation in a sense that it works with the filter of the brain. It allows the brain to get into the deeper states of relaxation so that, your higher subconscious could be open and it could be more readily accessible to heightened memories and experiences. And if you do believe that consciousness is not produced by the brain, but rather filtered through it, then we're really tapping into something different. And I think from allowing the brain to really be in a relaxed state and open, really allow ourselves to connect to a collective, consciousnness and to open ourselves up. And so it's my way of empowering people to have what I had minus the trauma of it. And I think past life regression is great because it's almost intimacy with eternity. You go through many lifetimes with the regressions and just understand that there's a continuity there's a continual sequence of our lifetimes. And we move on from different lifetimes, different lessons and gifts, but it's just a knowing of eternity from a regression, which is so much of a more skillful and less traumatic experience that I had from suffocating and losing my breath and having to deal with that trauma for my whole life. I think I also did it because I think people are looking for the life's purpose. They want to know that they're more than just paying the bills and all these other things, and they're wanting to remember why they came here or why they're guessing themselves, and they want to really connect to an intelligence far greater than their own to allow themselves to trust and knowing that they're here for a purpose. And it's to empower people because I think from talking about my near death experience or past life, regression, my goal is to empower people that this isn't something that I own, but this is something that we're all a part of. And if I'm known as the afterlife guy, the near death experience guy, I won't be very happy because I want people to know that in themselves. I'm just a mirror for who they are and what they're connected to, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. So you mentioned earlier on in our talk about soul families and that there might be something more you would like to share
Yeah.
about that.
Well, yeah. I mean, I connect to my own level when I get very relaxed to my own guides, even though their exact shapes and names. Sometimes I don't get as clear as my near death experience would be, which would be almost impossible in some ways. I could go back to it in memory the same way, but to connect to it exactly how it happened, I wouldn't be here. I would be over there. But I do get readings time to time because I do think when you lose a loved one, we could connect in our own way, but sometimes it's good for validation to have that interdimensional communication with a tested, effective medium. And so I went to a medium one time and she was connecting to one of my aunts who was one of my mentors later in life. And she got me back on this kind of quest of inner journey, my later teens, early 20s. But she came through in the reading and on her deathbed, she had, what's called deathbed visions, which is very common for people going through their last couple of days. And one of the messages that she last left with me was the power of a soul family and how there's an interconnectedness behind a soul family. And how, if you look at a family portrait, even though some people might look individually different than others, there's a tremendous connection that goes far beyond this lifetime. And I thought it was a cool message, but I just kind of put in the filing cabinet. I'm like, all right. And she was talking about how when she was crossing over, obviously she was sensing the hands of her loved ones on the other side and that she was talking to them and, which is, really cool too, in common for people to have that deathbed visitation. A couple of years later, a medium was connecting to her and actually the same medium who connected to her passed away a year ago from yesterday. So there's so much synchronicities happening, but she connected her and she was really clear, making clear contact. And she just said, "Why is your aunt saying the word picture over and over again? What does that mean?" And I just knew that that picture was her way of talking about the chain and this undeniable soul family of her last message. And to me, that just gave me a knowing and an evidence of this pure of this message. And I look at messages from loved ones as building a case of an eternity, kind of like a lawyer goes up to a judge and builds up different cases for a particular case. The same thing with this. And I thought that was a great message of eternity, but also of the undeniable connectivity and message of soul family, how we're so much more than what we think. And there's lifetimes that we connect to, and there's a ray of God that is expressed by the soul family in a different, expression, different style, and different, and similar kind of lessons and themes that unite that particular soul group together, if that makes sense. How
Yes.
it's a team effort, not just so much an individual effort, if that makes sense too.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Do you think that we sometimes incarnate with these people to
Without question or doubt, I mean, and and not just people biologically, we're not just limited by biological needs.
Mm.
I think soul family goes beyond just our biological nuclear family. I think we get very caught up in terminology and this is this, that, and that. It get very like territorial. And I just think it's important to just find ways to understand that if you're feeling you are with someone and just know that there's just no matter what you do, you're always connected to them. Even if you try, they always just find a way to come back to you. There's something to it. And we grow up with friends in high school or college, but then there's always the ones that just stick out and always come back to us. And they're just kind of like beyond the fray. And there's just something different. And I think that's also it too, where some that you meet and you never met before. And there's a knowing that I know you. And I think all souls know each other, but there's less amnesia of that particular soul, and there's a stronger connection of souls. So absolutely.
Yeah. That's so comforting, at least to me. So, Jake, why don't you share about your book, what caused you to write it, and what people can expect from it? And yeah, where they can get a copy of it.
My motive was so many different things in writing Life After Breath, but one of them was as a kid, I just loved going to libraries. And in my later teens, I started reading self-help books. And when I was in the energy of an author's, page, whether that was a Marion Williamson or Tony Robbins, and I saw their face smiling, I just said, I want to live on those shelves. I want to die on those shelves. I want my name to be on those shelves one day. And whenever I was going through a dark moment, I would always pick up that book on a cold winter's night and it would just give me life. And my near death experience I saw was allegorical for what I experienced from books, which was when I felt totally suffocated and lifeless. There was an infused eternity of life that I connected to. And in Judaism, we call that ruach or the wind of God, which is what we're breathed with, the breath of eternity, the breath of our essence. And losing the breath of my body, I was breathed in that whole new breath. And that really was the inspiration behind the title of Life After Breath. I wanted to give people a breath of life that was there when that was very much deprived in the world. And there were so many symbologies of that from the last year or two, from medical basis to emotional basis. But the common theme was people just felt like the life force that they were connected to was cut off. And so my hope is that this book gives a jolt of inspiration. It gives a recollection that we come from this beautiful place. We go to this beautiful place. We're always connected to it. And no pain, no suffering could ever take us. It's just temporary. It's turbulence, but it's not eternal. No storm ever lasts forever. And we come back to this beautiful place. And we don't have to wait till we die to get to heaven. We cultivate it in everyday lives. And so Life After Breath is my first book, that I wrote. I'm currently finishing up my next book. I really got very much personal. And I did that because after going through a lot of the near death experience talks, a lot of people felt very much alone or that I came from a very much of a privileged place. And so I very much, my goal was for people to find themselves in this experience and to really ground the experience so that people could be empowered within their own spirituality and empowered with their connectivity to spirit in the afterlife. That it was something that wasn't monopolized by near death experiencer, but it was there to allow people to remember. And that's our job. So that was a bit of my hope with the book. And I hope people could come back with that invigoration of life after with the book.
Wonderful. And I will have the book linked in the description for anyone interested. Do you have any other projects that you'd like to share? Anything else going on?
I work very closely with a lot of marginalized populations because yeah, I do recognize from my years in this book, it's like it seems like I'm seeing the same particular client in the same particular venue. We're not rolling up our sleeves enough to do this. And so, I am going to be working a lot more with aged populations and doing some stuff with developmental disabilities as well too within some of my work. And I think it's very much important to not just be pigeonholed in one particular client. I think everyone's important. And so for myself, I'm working on a couple different projects with a couple different, marginalized populations. This past summer was one of my greatest events where I presented at the Forever Family Foundation, which, if you're not familiar with, it's a group that works with loved ones who have lost people, in their lives, and it's a grief support group, but it works on a scientific basis and they have evidentially tested mediums. And I was the first ever near death experiencer to present there. And what I love about it was people came up to me and they're like, well, we love our messages from the mediums, but this was so much more expansive. And so I guess my goal is to just utilize this as an option for people going through grief and to present with different grief groups, in different programs. But I guess my biggest project is try to finish up my second book, which is a
Mm.
lot of the lessons from the other side extracted in a book. And I'm filling with the title, but the name I think is The Wisdom of Jacob's Ladder. Because, my name is Jacob, and you think of Jacob from the Bible, and he had the dream of the angels going up and down the ladder. And I had that in a playground, and there's so much in a name. And, I had my near death experience in a playground and just reminded me how we're all just children of God playing in God's playground. We're here to really nurture and care for each other and to be
Mm.
each other's keepers. And there's so many lessons from it. And so, my next book, I really wanted different lessons so that we don't have to wait till we die to get there. We could integrate that intelligence and awareness in everyday life.
This is a heavy question. If you're uncomfortable with it, just let me know. Okay. I can edit it
I'm a
out.
New Yorker. We could take a shot to the chin.
So you mentioned that in a past life that you remembered committing, ending your own life, and being someone who interviews near death experiencers and talks a lot about the other side, I get a lot of questions from people about, I would just much rather be there. And if there's no judgment over there, then what's the harm in just skipping out early? And I'm never sure how, I never really want to answer these myself because it's so hard for me to know what to say. Because on the one hand, I want to comfort people who have been through that with a loved one. But on the other hand, I don't want to encourage anyone in that direction. So, do you have anything to say to those people who might be thinking along those lines?
Yes, absolutely. It's a question I'm asked all the time. I don't necessarily know if my answer will satisfy every inquiry, but I could go with my own experience, and that's what I go by. And from having that lifetime, which I committed, that it wasn't like you said, I wasn't condemned or anything like that. But from completion, you begin. So when you feel like you're ending something, it's temporary, but you still, in your own way, at some point, go through that experience. And I think when you're there, you work very closely on the other side, with those who have lost loved ones, you continue that. But I think within this earth lifetime, there's a different way to understand that. And so from completion, we begin. And so from a personal basis, I work with that population
Mm.
as within the mental health field. And I didn't even think about that in doing that. That wasn't even a part of it. But again, that's a part of, and it's not a punishment, but it's just a way to find healing. And I think from that vantage point, you're able to really have a further understanding. But I think it's very important to understand that no matter what happens, you always have that chessboard piece to make. It might come through in different shapes, different ways, and it gets alleviated at times. And it's a case by case situation. I can't speak for all, but generally, from completion, we begin. And I think in our own way, it's learning that same playbook where trust and have a knowingness and have an awareness to what is inside of us is infinitely greater than what's in front of us. And it's choice. You can't take away choice, but either way, It's like, would you rather do it now or just put it off for later? And either way, you're going to get the work done. So it's just a matter of like choice in a way. But isn't it better? You worked this hard, you came this far. Why not see it through? And that was one of the just regrets that I had in committing suicide, where I just saw in that moment that I felt incredibly stuck, but I also saw that I would have been able to go through that, and I would have been that much more stronger. And I think the good news is we have so much more resources at hand, so much more support system to be able to handle this, and that you don't have to do it alone. You never did it alone. And it's my hope that hearing near death experience discussions in different case studies, that we just have a firm understanding of how small we see ourselves as in our situations as, and how much more we are loved and surrounded by love than we could ever imagine. I think so much of this lifetime is remembering who we truly are, what we're connected to allow us to go through these different experiences in this human life. So I think a lot of people get attached to their ego and their experiences over their true nature. And I think if you're able to remember who you are, it doesn't change the events, but it changes the engagement. I hope in some way that that moves the needle to some degree. It is a very difficult question, and a lot more time is needed for that. But I just think in a way, being there doing that, if I were to live life from the end and look at that moment, I would just say, trust in the infinite intelligence over my own limited awareness in that moment, and to trust that whatever we're going through, storms are not made to break us, but they're to make us in a way. And it's something that we're here to go through. And we could look at life through many different lenses. We could look at it through the victimized standpoint, or we could look at it through the growth oriented mind standpoint. In either way, it's the events of the events, and how we engage with them really defines the events. And so life is very much about how we perceive it and the pathways and the angles that we take between the stimuli and our own response, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you so much for answering that question.
Yeah, I hope that makes sense to viewers and to you to some degree.
Yes.
Being there firsthand, just knowing that we're very limited in what we see in our own suffering, and what going through that, we just don't recognize how much more we grow, from that experience. I do believe we go through experiences not just for our own self, but to have a greater understanding and awareness of what other people go through. And it's not just for ourselves, but
Mhm.
for ourselves to be able to guide and to work through people through other experiences. Right. So I think if we do incorporate, I think the greatest part of suffering is isolation. And if we're able to understand the purpose behind our own pain, we're able to really look at it through a whole different angle, that it's not just about us, but we're here to evolve that experience, and to assist someone through going through that period.
Is there any final words that you would like to share before we go?
Absolutely. I think it's also important to understand the great attractor of life that we are. So many times we are upset with our lives because we just focus on the things that we don't want, and we get those things, back to us. And I think I looked at the other side as the ultimate place of abundance, and you're connected to that inner place. Infinite possibilities are there in front of you. But I think in a way we've taught to like turn on our blinders. And even if it is exactly what we want, we chop it down because it's never enough. And so I think if we recognize that we are enough just as we are, and we're here to just express that infinite abundance in our lives, our whole lives change. And I think some people, they'll live their lives based off of a checklist of events. And if these events go well, then I'll feel happy. And not recognizing that joy and happiness isn't found outside of us, but rather within. It's just, a way to express this on the outside. And I think that's so much what I learned, where in any particular situation, any season, you could find what you're looking for. And I think some of the historical figures have been able to stand by those same ideologies, and people have changed the world. They lived from really connecting to this deep place within, and they weren't defined by their set of circumstances. I mean, I know someone by the name of Viktor E. Frankl, who wrote the book Man's Search for Meaning, was in one of the
Mhm.
abyss of humanity's existence in the Holocaust, and he wrote this great book. But he found the most freedom when every freedom was taken away from him, being in a prisoner in a concentration camp. And I think if he could find that, so too we could find that in our own situation. The playbook is there. And I think what's important is for people to learn how to really connect this part of themselves that they know can never be taken from you. And I find that, when I lead meditation groups, people come out and usually touch a part of themselves that's greater than their outside situation, more than their thoughts, more than their mind. There's just this eternal part that they connect to. And I think when you connect to eternity, you recognize, that there's just only life. There is no death. There's only life. Life will breed itself. And there's a continuity of it. And so hopefully from hearing this encounter, I know the term near death experience has that term of death, but I think really this experience is totally antithetical to anything of death. It's looking at death square in the face and recognizing through suffering, through pain, all that could feel very real and experience, but it returns back to the nothingness, and all that is left is eternity at the end of the day. And remembering that can allow us to engage with different, finite, difficult experiences within our everyday lives.
Thank you so much for being willing to do this interview and to share your wisdom and your experiences with us.
By God's grace alone, thank you so much for having me.
Thank you for watching the Love Covered Life podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, share this video with your friends, and comment with your thoughts and opinion. And check the description box for the links to my TikTok and Instagram, where I share the more personal side of my life, my website, where I share my paintings and merch, and also the Be a Guest link for anybody who's interested in sharing their story. Be loved, be happy, be at peace, and thank you for watching.